The video you are about to watch is something of a psychic scrapbook. It is quite literally the visual and auditory representation of my perspective and experience when merging with your auric field that is presented to me by Spirit. My name is Jenna PINKSTONE. You can connect with me on southernoracleeye.com or on Patreon, where gifts such as this Oracle Wisdom Journey will be shared with you as gratitude on a monthly basis for helping to build a more extrasensory world. Let's begin, y'all. The first sequencing that I notice is of a very linear fashion, and it resembles that of an old-timey movie, like an old-timey movie reel where it's like click, 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 and it's like frame by frame by frame, and it's all in black and white. And this old-timey movie frame is moving in this linear fashion from start to finish, with a moral to the story and a philosophy to consider and sensation and perception to explore within the characters presented upon the screen that is illusory and playing out before an audience. And what's so incredibly interesting about this movie sequencing of start to finish, left to right, beginning to end, is how familiar it really is to me. As a child, as a child who was alone most of the time, I should say, I was raised in this kind of movie world. And in essence, it was the media that kind of shaped my reality, very similar to the media that is shaping the reality of the youth of today, and how it is so much more complicated and vastly varied in terms of what is available to them. As I guess you could call me a Generation Xer, there was a time in my life that the internet did not exist, and it was the early impressionable times in which a movie where I would sit down and I would experience these visual images and these auditory types of stimuli that would merge together and create an experience, one of which I could relate to or not. And this was the vast world, and it was vast at the time. At my time, the world of movies was vast, and there was so much that was available, so much that was made accessible by me, by wandering down to the video hut, or later, much to my excitement, I could just sign on to Netflix and gain my movie. Oh my gosh, Moody came through. My Moody movie media. And so, therefore, what lay before me was this linear sequencing of events being played out before me in this left to right fashion is what I am experiencing now. And what's being shared truly is a notion that this is one dimensionality that of experience with respect to the metaphor that Spirit is sharing with us, that we can actually ascend to greater heights we can go into a different dimensionality of experience, much like the collective, we could call it. The collective of the human race kind of transcended that of movies into a media consumption, a media experience, expanse of experience into the world of the internet. And so now the plethora, the cornucopia of realities that we can transpose onto the reality of our own life becomes that much more widely recognized into more ascended heights of understanding ourselves in a different way, and into the descended depths of moving away from understanding and simply seeking stimuli. These are elevations. They are strata, you might call it, strata of experience that we can now explore. And I'm guided to look closely at these individual strata that lay juxtaposed and kind of folded atop and below one another. Imagine the side of a mountain that has been cut with a giant knife. And after that giant knife has cut into the side of that mountain, what lay inside of that mountain, the solid rock, is all exposed, and the layers of sediment that have been fossilized and have been weathered and then covered, and all that is contained by this sediment that was once more fluid. It was once dirt or mud or even magma that flowed, that moved, and now it is suspended within the earth as stationary and preserved. And there are layers of it. There are so many layers of this, and we call it strata because it is stratified in nature, in how it deposits itself. We call it strata because the stratification of one atop the other forms not a linear kind of parallel in fashion to the surface of the earth, but I mean, that is exactly how it was deposited, the linear fashion of it finding its place here. I'm sure it traveled a very long way, and it traveled across this earth's surface from left to right, just like your movie. There was a beginning to this sediment, and this strata, from where it ended up, can be considered, in the sequencing of this metaphor, the resolution or the end, where it ended up, where it is now in this present moment. But what we're guided to look more closely at is not the parallel sequencing of how it got here, but in the way in which it ended up. It in and of itself creates, with other sediments, with other deposits in this very space that it shares, others that have stratified themselves in this deposition as well. And the sequencing now shifts, not linear from left to right, beginning to end, but upward. And it is deposited in layers. And over time, what is seen when we cut with this giant knife into the middle of this mountain, what we see within this mountain are these layers of multiple elemental forms that have found themselves within the same place and are ascending upward as one mountain of many. And so it is in this one mountain of many stratified layers that we can see what emerges from this stratification, this suspended in time, the flow of the ages that was seemingly linear. At the time, it felt point A to point B, beginning to end, with a moral of the story in the middle. But when we are allowed to look back at that which is suspended in the historical context of all of these linear sequences, one atop the other, like pages in a book, or dimensional trajectory timelines that exist alongside each other, like that of a fractal, displaying the light and ever so slight variations of outcome, all from a central point. And that central point is indeed the earth and all of the elements that comprise it that are subjected to the electromagnetic frequencies from its heart center. It is when we are able to look at these strata in the context of how they came to exist, and in their existence we are able to observe how that existence has indeed influenced and impacted the present linear sequencing of point A to point B that we are ourselves experiencing. And it gives great depth. It gives just an immense amount of context that we are able to literally delve deeply within ourselves, within the earth, to discover new layers of what begat you. And no matter which direction, north, south, east, west, you happen to be traveling, no matter which choices you as an individual happen to be making, somehow ascension towards the heavens as one strata lay on top of the next, ascension is inevitable. Whenever you comprise all of these different elements, all of these different others, all of the sediments that were deposited in all of the ways throughout the ages, where you are headed is fated. the point B is always up. And the point A is always from everywhere that you have been. And the accumulation of the wisdom that these sedimentary strata hold within their layers is always accessible by you. A prominent feature and theme to this oracle wisdom journey that we've embarked on today is one of elevation and that of ascension to new heights. And in the spiritual community, we hear a lot about ascension. We hear that word almost, it almost makes me cringe to even use it today. But the fact is, whenever we look at the definitive root of what ascension means and what it means to ascend, and if we extend it to the physical reality so that we can better understand and better grasp what it is that we are actually talking about, what I'm transported to look more closely at is the Orville brothers constructing their plane, and how difficult that process must have been, how many curse words were exchanged, how much strife and challenge they encountered, and how they probably at some point grew to despise each other through this process of creating this device that would quite literally help them to ascend. And that moment when their plane actually lifted off the ground, this can be applied to most any challenge that any of us encounter. Anything that we put our blood, sweat, tears, energy, effort, and we actually endure so much pain in order to see something manifest and realize and change our life. This is what I am shown. And what is it that is opened up to them? What is it at the moment that their plane lifts as it ascends up off of the Earth's surface? You see, up to that moment, up to that very moment, before this moment of truth where they are able to set in motion their imagination of what it is they had worked towards for so long, all that had been available to mankind up to that moment was limited to the surface of the earth. It was all north, south, east, or west. The surface area was actually the limiting factor in the way we were able to travel. And what was it that opened up as soon as that ascension, that literal ascension off of the Earth's surface was achieved? What was actually available to them at that moment, and to so many that came after all of their blueprints and all of their plans and everything that they had worked for to get this plane off the ground? What was it? What world was actually opened up was one where the Earth's surface was no longer that limiting factor. It was no longer the only way in which we were able to go. If you visualize a plane within the atmosphere, flying in the clouds, going past mountains, looking down at the patchwork the quilt of the earth, blanketed by the foliage, we are able to experience so much more dimensional capacity as to where we are able to exist. We can go up, we can go down, we can fly in so many other places. The entire world has opened up to us, almost as though the world that opened up to the collective, when it was no longer just a movie that we were able to enjoy. The possibility for turmoil and danger is far greater. It even extends further into space in all that we are able to achieve once we leave the surface of the earth, once we ascend to greater heights. Everywhere we are able to go within this cosmos is all of a sudden open for exploration. A new terrain in which we are able to embark as pioneers. This entire new world that is before unknown to us. This is our direction. This is what has opened up. And as we navigate this new terrain, we almost need another word, because the word terrain comes from the root word in Latin terra, which most literally means land. When all of a sudden the place for a human to occupy no longer needs to be the soil, the sediment beneath our feet, and it can be the open air that quite honestly is permeated by the openness of possibility, with nothing hindering our movement. This is what has opened up for us. And the potentiality for what it is that we are able to explore lies waiting for us to discover it. Thank you for attuning to this psychic scrapbook of sorts, a process I call an Oracle Wisdom Journey, which was made possible by a client whose auric field I merged with my own extrasensory perspective. I am Jenna PINKSTONE, the Southern Oracle, and I look forward to interfacing with you on southernoracleeye.com and on Patreon, where a soul family is reuniting to help build a more extrasensory world. Please like this video and subscribe for future Oracle offerings.